his actual works. Maybe this? Ah, okay, that's the IEP. But things that are online you could definitely find easily. Descartes, discourse on the method. Obviously it was written in French and Latin, not English, but there's plenty of opportunity to read it on the web in English. Just look at the Wikipedia. And what he gives us here is a section on optics. The way he's the one considered to have discovered why rainbows are colored the way they are. Everyone knows why rainbows have colors. If you, especially here in Alaska, it's really neat because you get sometimes full rainbows. It's so beautiful when you do, but you could obviously set it up so that you can see the sun is right behind you, and as you move around, the rainbow goes with you, actually, right? Because what you're seeing is you're seeing the light shining through kind of a atmospheric puzzle, so to speak, that gives you this impression of the rainbow, and Descartes figured that out. The geometry. He also gives us algebraic geometry. He was a mathematician. In fact, he's more famous as a mathematician in his own day than as a philosopher, per se. And an interesting aspect of what he figured out, one day lying in bed, looking up at the ceiling and watching a fly walking around on the ceiling, it dawned on him that if he had a grid-like map of the ceiling, he could chart the path of the fly using that grid. And as a result of that, he came up with what's called Cartesian, because his name is Descartes, right? Cartesian coordinate system. So you see you've done these, I'm sure, in all kinds of classes, math classes, etc. So he's the one that invented this X and Y lines, and then you can have the grid and you can map things out. And by the way, I think even though that's the story, that he figured that out from watching a fly on a ceiling, but that he also needed that because if he was in the military, probably in the artillery, which was a new thing, they needed some way of being able to figure out where the shells were going to go. And this was essentially the mathematics that enabled the cannoneers to figure out, if we put the cannon this way, it'll fire this way, and this is the rate it'll go down. It's, they basically needed ways of calculating where the heck they were going to hit things with the various stages of development in cannoneering. And he was there kind of at the ground level when they were doing that kind of stuff. I don't know if muskets needed that same sort of figuring out as well, but that's the Three Musketeers. If you're familiar with Defoe as the author of the Three Musketeers, as a kid that was like a really popular book for me. I don't know if you've ever heard of it or not. The Three Musketeers, the muskets. They even had like a stand because those guns were so heavy. You couldn't really hold them, etc. And then you had to, of course, manually reload them and so on. Fun stuff. The other book that he's most famous for, remember the one that everybody is supposed to read, is the Meditations. This looks like it's actually the actual text, doesn't it? I guess so. So you can find them, and what happens? He explains. He's confused. His teachers are all confused. Everybody thinks they know stuff, but they really don't. How can we fix this? We have to establish a firm basis for knowledge so that we can work from there. That's the beginning point, right? So what can I doubt? We have to get rid of everything that I can possibly doubt. And so I doubt all sorts of things. What can I doubt? I can doubt things that I see, the colors, etc. Light changes. As light changes, it appears that the color of the thing changes. Notice the wax. He's very interested in wax, how wax is a semi-solid, solid. At some point it's solid, but if you warm it up, it can be changed, its shape, and so on. So how do we think of this wax as a solid if at the same time I can change it so easily, and so on? Problem seems to be that my perspective conditions change, and as a result I can doubt whether or not things appear to me the way they look, or the feeling of things is really the way they feel, or the color, so colors, smells, all of that seems doubtful. So let's assume that we don't know anything for sure from our senses because of that problem. When you get right down to it, it seems like, and remember the movie The Matrix always comes up here as somewhat similar to his theory. What if there is an evil deceiver that's completely fooling me into thinking things are the way they are, and they're really not? Well, it's possible, isn't it? We've been deceived before by somebody. Well, they could be, and so therefore, what if there's an evil deceiver that's deceiving us about everything? Remember the Matrix, right? And if you're convinced that that is at least a logical possibility, how do you get out of it? Well, says Descartes, and remember the paragraph I mentioned by St. Augustine in his book, The City of God, his reply to the skeptics. When you get right down to it, you cannot doubt that you exist. Because who is it that's doubting? It has to be you, right? So you can't doubt that you exist and you not exist. So therefore, you exist. That's the absolute basis for knowledge. You know absolutely that you exist. Now, he doesn't follow on with Augustine and then go on to say, and I know that I know, and that I love that I know that I know, and so, therefore there's a trinity of things that I know and I love, etc. He's not going to follow that, but he does follow the stages that Augustine gives, and then comes to conclude that I know for sure that I exist. But, and this is an interesting but, Descartes doesn't then assume that my body exists. As far as Descartes is concerned, I'm still doubtful if any of the things that I think of as my body are actually fact. So therefore, I can't trust that the things that appear to be my body and the things that my body experiences are fact. I can't really prove that based on just knowing that I exist. It might be that the only thing that exists is my mind, the soul. So we've got this dichotomy between my mind or soul and the body, which is doubtful. But he does take another step in the meditations. He goes on to point out that I conceive of God. And I conceive of God as being all perfect, all good, all powerful, all everything. Right? God, therefore, in my mind, is conceived as infinite. Whereas I, being someone who's doubting all of this, is clearly finite. Well, and this is kind of an interesting leap, says Descartes. Well, he doesn't say it, I say it. He says, I cannot have had the idea of God from myself because I'm too finite to come up with it. it had to come from God itself, or himself. So my concept of God as infinite and all-powerful, etc., has to come from God. And he says, you can't have a cause that has an effect unless the cause is greater than the effect. So therefore, God must exist. So that's step 2 for Descartes. First, I exist. And by the way, if you're at cocktail parties, I don't know if you go to cocktail parties, maybe they're soda parties, but in any case, if you go to parties and anybody mentions Descartes, you can say, I think, therefore I am, and that indicates you're familiar with Descartes. You could be even fancier and put it in Latin and say cogito ergo sum, which is the same thing in Latin, right? Anyone want to practice that? Cogito ergo sum. Cogitare is the verb. Ergo, therefore, sum, I am, right? Easy. In any case, so God exists. By the way, this is also referred to as Descartes' version of the ontological argument. It's not the exact same as Anselm's, and in fact, almost everybody believes it's much weaker because it's dependent on some extra things like cause and effect relationships. As we'll see, David Hume will destroy this argument's security, essentially, because of that. We'll see, there's a criticism of cause and effect being necessary. So assume Descartes now knows that he exists, at least his mind does. 2, God exists, and because of the characteristics of God that he used to prove that God must exist, God could not also lie to us. God would not deceive us. And therefore, the things that are clair et distinct in French, clear and distinct in English, are not wrong, or not false. So in other words, I exist, God exists, and stuff is as God lets me see it when I'm sure of it. But now here's the interesting thing. What am I sure of? I am sure of mathematics. 1 + 1 = 2, etc., etc. So as far as Descartes is concerned, the only things that we really know for sure are mathematics. Not sensory information. That's still a puzzle for us. By the way, Leibniz is later going to say, how on earth could such a smart person be so dumb as to think that the body didn't really exist and that things are not really being perceived by the body, etc. Leibniz certainly accepts all that as de facto, right? But Descartes does continue to, throughout the rest of his work, continue to suspect that our sensory input is not trustworthy. That's actually pretty close to the way we conceive of things today. We would say that you absolutely perceive things the way you think you do, but that's not a guarantee that things in some other sense are really that way. I mean, that's, if you're the person that thinks Lincoln just walked through the wall, I can see, President Lincoln standing there in the room. Don't you see him? There are people that do that and see things like that. And when we meet them, we think there's something wrong with this person. That person needs help, medication maybe, right? But as far as that person is concerned, they're absolutely certain they're seeing or having these experiences, right? Well, that's what I think a contemporary psychologist would say is you're definitely having an experience. In fact, I can look at your brain and I can see activity indicating that you are seeing something. It's just that, gosh, I'm looking at your optic nerve, and your optic nerve isn't actually seeing anything. You think you're seeing something, but nothing's actually there. But you're convinced. And so as far as our contemporary, I think, analysis of your relationship with your sensory input, your mind's activity, you're convinced that's what's really going on. But can that be used to be certain that there's actually something out there? No, apparently not. What else is interesting? That's his main argument in the Meditations. And it's interesting.